Oh, sorry, Julia, we should hit the record button before we
Oh yeah,
start, probably.
real
Just
quick.
a reminder.
Recording. We're
Oh, great.
recording.
Okay.
Thanks,
Okay.
Jenny. Hi. So we're going to get started here in the governance working group. It's April 1st, and if you haven't seen the agenda, you can take a look at it. It's posted on Discord. We'll have all these links up later on as well. If there's a document that I shared there with a number of links that you can go through and look at your leisure later, as well as now while you're on the call. So the first to get started is let's just have our morning stand up and find out what's been happening over the past week and what everyone's working on, any blockers, and a little discussion what we're going to do next week. So anyone want to go first?
Sure, I'll go ahead and take that one on. So from my end, this week we had some fun, tiny little updates based on our conversations last week. We added the icon to the StacksGov organization. We're messing with YouTube, trying to get it in all the right places, but it's kind of fun to see that come together. And then we've been doing some additional cleanup and trying to keep up with the resources there. I know Lane's been adding more as we're getting close to the proposal here. So just some exciting things on that end. And for me in this upcoming time, I am just kind of open to little stuff that needs to be done and or developing some of the newer resources we've been talking about, like a basic how-to on how to do these calls and post notes so that other people can jump in and take over, and don't really have any blockers at this point. So I think we're just gonna keep rocking and we can move on to the next person.
Thanks, Jason. Anybody else want to talk about what they've been working on?
Yeah, I can go. So I've been thinking about ways to sort of up the number of participants we have on our survey. I know that Blockstack has an email list that we could potentially hit up. And so I've asked to see whether we could use that. I know we don't like to ping that list too often, but I know a good demographic that would be interested in the work that we're doing are the developers that participated in app mining. So waiting to hear back on that, and hopefully we can get those numbers up pretty soon, because I know it's important to us to have diverse distribution with that.
Sounds great, Jenny. Any blockers or anything there?
No blockers other than just waiting to see whether, I'm not sure exactly what we use that email list for. Like I said, I think we don't like to ping that list too often. So hopefully, I mean, this is a good reason to do so. So hopefully we can do that soon, because I can see that really upping our numbers pretty quickly.
I can do an update. So I posted mine on the PM issue and the PM repo. I just find it helpful to like organize my own thoughts ahead of time, but we've noticed on some of the Ethereum calls, sometimes the updates, I guess this is not an issue for us today, but when there's a lot of people with a lot of updates, the updates can take a long time. So we might want to consider moving to like a more asynchronous format in the future. So just wanted to share that thought up front. I'm in the process of reviewing the governance research notes that Brittany shared. That's like a fantastically helpful document. So Brittany is not on the call right now, I guess, but thank you to Brittany for that. That's really helpful. A lot of good insights in there. On the survey, so I checked a moment ago, we're at 32 responses total, right? So that's 24 on top of the 8 that we started with from the working group. So that's fantastic progress in percentage terms, but I think we definitely still have a long way to go. So thank you, Jenny, for proposing that we use that email list. I think that's a great idea if we can do that. The governance proposal, so I mentioned on the last call that it was this very large monolithic document. So I think I mentioned this in Discord yesterday as well, but I began to break that out into separate issues, which I think can stand on their own. So some of it is kind of like some challenges we're presented with, maybe the founding set of documents we want, et cetera, et cetera. So there's like a bunch of issues now in a new repository that I created and shared the link for. So like I'd encourage people to take a look, post some comments, feel free to open their own proposals, and that I hope it's kind of a starting point for like what can become a larger body of proposals over time. And we'll talk about how that fits in with like the existing protocol proposals, which are the SIPs. What else? Interviews. So thank you again to everyone who participated in the interviews and reviewed their notes. I've got the okay from, I think, everyone except one person that I interviewed. And so I've begun posting those publicly as well under the resources repository. There's a link here in the update. Yeah, next things I'll work on are, as Jason mentioned a moment ago, working with Jason and Julia to record some of the kind of best practices around things like running these calls and posting updates and stuff. So we have that body of knowledge available for other people who want to contribute. And then beginning to think more about SIP governance specifically and how it fits into the big picture. And yeah, I just wanted to also add a shout out. Thank you so much for Julia and Jason for just stepping up in a big way and offering to help with this call and continuing to contribute to resources and project management. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Lane. Brittany will be jumping on a few minutes. She's on another call. So anybody else? As for me, I've been looking at the information that we have about from the one-on-one interviews, and I've been looking at everything that Lane's posted, and as well as what Brittany's posted. And so there's quite a bit of great information there to dive into, and I'm really seeing that there's an overall area where we as participants in the working group can really get involved and take some ownership on different areas as we go forward here. So I'm really kind of excited about everything that Lane's been doing and put out there on GitHub for the proposals, and big thanks to Jason for all his work as well on GitHub and in many other ways. And so super excited about where we're going and how things are right now. Anybody else have any stand-up they want to do?
Well, hi. Well, they've been a very active week, and I'm personally trying to get aware of what's going on in different communities, blockchain communities, and there's been a lot of work of reading and understanding, and because, well, actually we don't have the experience on those communities, so then we had to look for other people, their experiences. So, and that's been a lot of work. Then trying to also to promote the new group of the new community that we have here in Chile, and also, well, actually in Latin America, that people have been involved in with Blockstack. So try to them to also to fill up the survey. It looks like that some people have turned up into that. And also we read some of the interviews that Lane has managed to accomplish, and they look quite interesting, and there's several topics that surely will be very helpful in order to establish the governance. But I also realized that all this interviews could also help us as a base for other working groups, and so they has a lot of information. It looks like obviously he has interviewed people that is really involved with Blockstack and all that. So it's very valuable information also that can be used for other purposes. Well, that's more or less, and time passes so quickly.
Thank you, Philip. So I think unless there's another stand-up that anyone wants to give, I'll wait for a second here. I think we'll move on to the next topic, which is the community survey. And Lane, you've pretty much given us the overview on that. Is there anything more that you wanted to add with respect to the community survey?
I think it's kind of, I was going to say it's kind of a game of wait and see. All I mean by that is, like, I don't think that it makes too much sense to dive into the sort of set of results we have right now yet. There's probably some minimum number we want to collect. I guess having said that, we are getting to a point now where there probably is some patterns and some meaningful data. So I guess sorry, this is a very roundabout way of answering your question. I think what I would share is the following. So the results are landing in a Google Sheet, as I mentioned in my update. And that can be shared, but it also contains some sensitive information in it, like people's email addresses for those who chose to provide them. And so I guess the question I would ask everyone is like, when do we want to begin trying to analyze this data? Do we want to wait until we hit some minimum number of responses? Do we want to start doing that process now? I'll kind of leave that as an open question.
Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so at this point, I think it's great that we're starting to see a ton of responses. And while we could pull some info out, we'll likely end up doing the same type of analysis again when we get closer to our stopping point. I mean, if we're looking at, what was it, 32 responses right now, like maybe at 50, we could start frameworking how we want to analyze the data or something like that. But I would put that focus towards pushing towards that number of 100 as fast as we can.
Yeah, I agree with your last point there, Jason. I think like the marginal unit of effort right now is probably better spent increasing the number of responses than performing analysis yet. But I do think we can, begin to think about the type of analysis we want to do.
Yeah, I would also agree with the trying to move the number up to 100 responses, as you mentioned, Jason and Lane. I think that's where we should put our immediate effort right now, is to, and I know Jenny mentioned about perhaps being able to get that out on the Blockstack list. So we'll see. I guess we'll hear back from Jenny on that, and then we can also individually, promote it, or have our folks in our communities promote it as well. Any thoughts?
Well, I counted more or less 150 around, 180 people that are involved in Discord, at least in that field, but must be different ones in the other networking platforms. I don't know, Telegram, I don't know how is that, and that's why I was suggesting that, well, Jenny was saying that probably they don't want to ping so much, so frequently, because of course the people don't react if it's too many pings. So, but then how we also addressing the stackers, the people that and also these people that were called by Bitcoin. What was it, Bitcoin or blockchain? The blockchain.com site, that in order to open their wallets. Some of those will be interested to get some of that feedback. So, because 180 people to have 100 people to answer is quite a challenge. And so, well, that's more or less. So if we get 500 people, from that 500 people, 500 is easier to get 100. Also, this now, of course, the answers well, they will be quite challenging, but in terms of analyzing, because will be broad differences between each other.
Those are some good points there, Philip, on that, and on getting the number up, maybe even higher than we're really initially looking for.
So I think, I'm sure Philip is right about counting the people in Discord. I just wanted to mention, I'm sure Jenny knows better than I do. Like, I'm sure there are thousands of people, if not tens of thousands, in the quote unquote broader community on the email list, if you include people who are token holders, all that kind of thing. So I guess it just depends on, like, I agree, getting 100 people out of 100 and something people on Discord might be difficult. But if we look at the broader community, percentage-wise, it's much lower.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether there is enough exposure to or awareness of the work that we as a working group are doing. And if not, I think maybe it would be worth giving a more official update, like putting a blog post out there and linking to that blog post in an email, I think would be a great way to raise awareness, if not, and to get people to take the survey. I've actually been meaning to ask this, but I think so much of the work we're doing is really interesting. So whether folks out there are ready to take the survey or not, it'd probably still be good to give that update. Do we feel ready to do something like that, or is that something that we consider a little later down the line?
I think it's a great idea. It was part of our original roadmap for this whole project, like kind of writing some sort of a blog post to share with the community kind of the intentions of the project and maybe some of the background and some of our plans. And I think Brittany accomplished some of that with the original forum post she wrote, but I think that this would be a good time to write more, and I'm happy to work on that with others.
It could be a good idea. Good
Yes.
idea.
Yes, I second or third that. I think that's a great idea as well, and happy to help you out with that, Lane.
Yeah, cool. We'll add that to the task list. Yeah, I can maybe start by proposing kind of a framework of what that would look like, and then we can kind of take it from there. And I guess also, Jenny, like if you think that this is something that should be released like before an email goes out, which would probably be the case, then we could talk about like the right timing as well. But I guess sooner is better than later.
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about details, but I'm excited about prospect of doing that. I think so the responses we've gotten so far to the work that we're doing are, excitement and interest. So making that available to the wider community can definitely only be a good thing.
Fantastic. Anything more on the community surveyor? I think we should probably move along to talking about the one-on-one interviews and notes, if you're up to talking about that, Lane.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know how much more I have to say at this moment. So I think 3 have been published. I will continue to do that over the coming days. They should all be done by the time we have our next call, or perhaps all but that one that I had mentioned. And there were 8 total so far. I think the best thing would be for folks to read them when they have time. And I guess I would have 2 asks. So the first is think about as you're reading them, think about whether we want to keep doing more of them. I'm happy to do more. I'm sure others, could contribute. We can make this a community effort. And just as a point of comparison here, we did something similar in the Ethereum community a couple of years ago, and our goal was to interview 100 developers. And I think we actually exceeded that. I think we ended up interviewing maybe as many as 150. And that just became a really incredible, rich resource, like this body of information. Of course, everything was released publicly. In that case, it was not anonymous. Yeah, just an incredibly rich resource for people to mine and jump into and begin looking for insights or new product ideas or how to improve existing, products and processes and things. So I guess my first ask as you're reviewing them is think like, would it make sense to do more of these? And if so, how? And then also start looking for themes, and maybe something else I can do is I can add another document somewhere where I point out some of the themes I've seen. And just kind of, again, how do we analyze these results and how do we make them actionable and what do we do with them?
I think that sounds fantastic. The idea of being able to, as you did with Ethereum, find different themes and look at that for new products, and that those would give great insight as to where we can go and where we are now and what's the pulse of the community. I really like that, all those ideas. Any other thoughts?
I have one more ask, which just came to mind. So most of these first set of interviews, I tried my best to sort of be scientific. And what I mean by that is kind of asking the same questions in like roughly the same order to everyone. So another ask I would have of the community, of you folks, as you read the notes is like, what would you do differently? Are there questions I should be asking that I'm not asking? Would you do it in a different order? Would you not ask the questions I'm asking? That kind of thing. There's a template, so I'll post the template as well, and maybe we could like collaborate on that.
Thank you, that's wonderful. Any other thoughts on interviews?
No, they're very rich. Obviously, it would be wonderful to have more like that, more of those like that from different parts of the world. Um, if we can get one from China, from Hong Kong, or from Singapore, or to get to know what they're thinking about. So, but it's a lot of work. I can see that in your notes. So congratulations for that work.
Thanks for reviewing them. It's good to know that someone has taken a look.
Thank you, Lane. We really appreciate the work that you've done on the working group and in the interviews as well.
Well, thank you thank you to everyone who participated in the interviews as well. I've learned a lot. It's really been exciting and a pleasure to speak to everyone, and I certainly hope we can do more.
Lane, did you want to talk about the preliminary governance proposal, the information that you've put out now? Did you want to give a presentation about that?
Sure. Yeah, I can speak about this for a moment. So, Juliet, thank you for pulling a bunch of that into this document that you shared. I'm just reviewing the agenda Google document that you shared for this call. I'll repost the link here just in case anyone missed it in the Discord. Right, so I see that you pulled in like most of the things I had posted in GitHub. So I guess I could take 5 minutes and just really quickly walk through this. So that starts on page 2 of the document that Juliet put together. Does that sound like a reasonable use of 5 minutes, Juliet?
That sounds great, Lane.
Cool. Yeah, so the first one here is scope of governance. I think this is a good starting point. I'm also really happy you put this first in the document. Like, I think before it says this in bold, right? Before we try to govern things, I find that it's very, very helpful to talk about like what exactly it is we want to govern. So kind of asking this preliminary question, like what is in scope of governance and what is out of scope. I think it's a bit of an open question. I mean, some things are for sure. Like we know absolutely that there's going to be some sort of a foundation or entity like that, and that's obviously within scope. We know that things like the protocol are in scope. We know that like PBC is out of scope, but I think there's some gray areas there. So I'd appreciate people taking a look at that and sharing thoughts on if anything's missing in particular, or should be moved from one list to the other. The next section, challenges. This stuff is not specific to Blockstack. So this is kind of like a summary of some of the things I've seen and learned and understood participating in blockchain governance and other projects and having conversations about it with some really amazing people that I've learned a lot from over the past few years. So yeah, like, again, just curious to hear people's thoughts and if they think things are missing. A lot of stuff in here about like technocracy and plutocracy and some of these challenges that we face. Case studies is a placeholder. So the document that Brittany shared includes a lot of really rich background on some of these projects. And I think some that aren't even on this list, like Algorand is a good example. So I think it would be really fun to, I mean, I'm happy to take a first crack at this and like fill in, a summary of like, this is my understanding of how governance works in Bitcoin and Ethereum and Zcash and what's working well, what's not working well, but it could be fun to kind of crowdsource that. And I included a link at the bottom here to this CryptoGov initiative, which is another initiative I'm a part of, which is actually trying to do some of this crowdsourcing already. So there's some resources there we can draw on. Principles, pretty self-explanatory. So just, yeah, I should probably call these like meta principles or governance principles or something. I'll clarify that in GitHub. This is not like the foundational principles. How do I explain? These are the principles that I'm trying to bear in mind as we design governance, if that makes sense. So it's distinct from like the shared principles or shared values of our community, but I think it's also an important list of things. So these are things like keeping things simple, like minimum viable governance. Yeah, and then yeah, I think those are the ones you included. So I'll stop there because that's a lot of material. But there's a lot more on GitHub, so please do take a look, and I'm curious to hear what other people think. Oh, sorry, and just to reiterate, there's some stuff missing. So there are some sections of the proposal, like the stuff that's specific to the foundation itself, that I've not yet moved over to GitHub, and the reason is because that's just very up in the air until there's some very basic decisions made, like jurisdiction. There's not a whole lot that I think can be. Like there's not a sense in our debating or discussing those things yet because we need to figure out those basics first. But I will share those as soon as that's possible.
Are there any questions for Lane?
No, at this point, I just want to echo my thank you for all the work done too. I'm excited to see more of this as it's coming together. I started looking through some of the issues, but I've got a little more reading to do today. And yeah, just excited to see it all coming together. You know, all the emails I got definitely alerted me that something was going on.
Right. So for anyone who hasn't yet, you can go to this GitHub repository and click watch, I guess, and it'll like alert you when new things get posted or things get changed. That's always a good idea. One ask is, I was just thinking of this, like code of conduct is a good example. It's something that we've talked a little bit about on these calls. I haven't written anything down for that yet, but that's a great one. I think people could dive into and begin posting some ideas or like maybe links to other, code of conducts from other communities, things like that.
Yes, I would definitely be, as Jenny would know, I'd be glad to help out with code of conduct. That's one of the things that I'm also passionate about. So I'm excited that you raised that, and I want to thank you for putting up everything on GitHub on the so far what we have on the proposal. I think we all have a lot to dive in and think about with what you've put up so far, and I apologize if I haven't put everything in this document that we're moving through on the call today. But really excited to see this. Was so excited to see everything you posted yesterday. So I think over the next week, we should all probably be taking a look at it, giving some thought to it, and then next week, perhaps diving into it, depending where we are on next week. So I really appreciate this, and thank you so much, Lane.
Yeah, well, thank you for everyone's patience. I know it was brought up on a couple of previous calls. I finally was able to post them. Obviously, I'm always happy to talk about these on calls. I'm happy to discuss them asynchronously on GitHub, but just throwing this out there, if people feel that we need more time to go deeper into any of these things, I'm more than happy to schedule like a separate deeper dive at some point.
This is, I don't know if it's conduct, but also the covenant, that we see there was an example there for forking and dividing and try to get something else and divide from the original idea, etc. So those are one of the aspects that we had to think how to maintain that unity, and that was mentioned in one of the interviews, and that I think that is very valuable, and that's also good to consider that, Juliet. So the the commitment to the vision.
Thank you, Philip. Anyone wants to talk about with the preliminary proposal that Lane's, it's really an overview of the proposal that Lane's prepared. Any more thoughts, any ideas about where we should be going in the next week? All right. Brittany, if you're on the line, would you like to go next and give the Stacks Foundation update?
Yeah. Thanks for everyone here and for hosting. Sorry, it was a few minutes late in the beginning, but I've been listening along. So the update with the foundation is that I was actually a little delayed this morning because we were talking to legal counsel around foundation setup. So we've been going through kind of the different jurisdictions in which we could incorporate and trying to get smart on the potential implications of like tax participation, board members, how boarding meetings need to be set up. So that's been a good exercise for us because originally we were just looking at like the different types of jurisdictions based on the requirements where members are and the flexibility of them, but there is this underlying sense of tax. So for example, we learned that a Singapore foundation would also have to have an offshore entity in order to be able to do things like give out grants to the network without having to pay large sums of tax on every grant that's given out, or passing on that tax to the people who receive them in a certain way. So there was a lot of complication in that. So we're just kind of trying to get up to speed on that. So it sounds like a Singapore foundation is still on the table, but we're also looking at the US nonprofit entity. And we have a call with Deloitte that will provide more information on just tax implications, because our goal is how do we best serve the community with the foundation, which would mean being able to provide resources around education, around building in the network, things like fellowships, grants, outlining, all of those activities are what we're trying to optimize for. But because there's like a related cash inflow outflow with those, we want to make sure that the entity is not prohibiting those types of activities from occurring. So like I said, we've seen other peers in the ecosystem do things like Zcash is a US nonprofit, and then Algorand Foundation is a Singapore, CLG, which is a Singapore foundation. So there are ways that each have done those, but I think we want to make sure that like the mission, a lot of the governance things that the foundation will take on, as in Lane's proposal, we can actually do them from the legal and tax side. So all of that is happening. I think by the end of the week, should have an update on kind of which path we are pursuing. But right now, those are kind of the considerations, and why it's taking a little bit of time is just to get expert opinions, especially on something that was a very new industry, as you guys know. And so beyond that, the other considerations are around board members. These different entities require a different number of board members in order to incorporate and form the organization. So those determinations won't be done. I think, as I mentioned, kind of the minimum number of board members. I will be moving over to be the executive director, so I will be leaving PBC once I take on that in the new entity, and that will help like create the initial entity. But then how those board members, initial board members, will be required to be added. Started putting together some thoughts, and it's in that long list of notes, which I can summarize for you guys as well. What makes up a good board? And I think it's, making sure that we reflect the community in which we operate. So having different stakeholders represented, that would include, having a community voice represented, but also the different types of expertise that we would need. So it's great to have open source expertise. It's great to have legal and financial expertise. It's great to have crypto specific expertise, even like academia expertise. So kind of, working with this governance group here around thinking about the types of qualities and the types of skill sets that would make the community thrive because the expertise is on the board, and trying to kind of set up a skeleton of the skill sets that we want to have, and then use those as a way to inform the types of board members over the next 6 months to a year that we would feel comfortable representing those different expertise. So I think that is one of the key things that's top of mind. I think the other thing is this idea, it's basically taking this learning from Zcash, is that they have a community advisory board. And this community advisory board is able to do a number of things for the community and within the community, which is having regular ways in which they can surface new issues. They can vote on those issues. Those issues can then be reviewed by the board and approved. And it sounds like in the instance of Zcash, you know, the board has never had to sort of intervene because usually the community comes out with a resolution and it's in line with the mission. So there's no need for like pushback or vetoing from the board level. So I think that that kind of represents a really flexible, interesting way in which we can think about the governance of the foundation without getting too caught up in the formal board members, you know, either having to represent like 50 different interests or something, but actually giving more of the power back to the community, which I think is something that's come up a lot in these calls. So I don't know if folks have had a chance to look at Zcash, the way that they do their advisory board, but I'm really excited about kind of that potential. And that could be something maybe as a governance group that we work on, is understanding what are the pros and cons, what are the challenges and opportunities for that. So that's a little bit about the sort of decision making of the foundation that I've been looking into. The other component that I think is becoming more clear is that what will the foundation do first? It looks to me like the Stacks improvement proposals. So this is the SIP process. We currently have a process in which, you know, new proposals are submitted to the SIP process. They are then reviewed and approved or commented on by the core engineers, and then that's how an improvement would be accepted into the group. I think that that whole process will be moved over to the foundation, and that's where I think we can actually see the governance at work. Okay, so how are we going to do this? What does it look like? What are the required pieces of information that we would need in order to do that? So I know that Elaine has a lot of experience through the Ethereum Foundation. They have a proposal process around submitting new updates or features. So this is again where it's like, okay, how can we borrow the best of what's already out there and make sure that it suits the needs of the Blockstack community specifically? But that's another place where the governance group could be really helpful. And I'm very curious to hear everyone's ideas here around how we would then go about saying like, okay, we want the SIP process to be something that we work on. How do we collaborate together to make that the best process as possible? So I'll stop there. So those are kind of the three updates. One, we're still figuring out the legal. Two, this idea of the advisory, the community advisory as the mechanism in which to surface ideas and make changes and votes. And then the third is the SIP process, like how would that look underneath the foundation, since that will likely move over first.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. I know it can't be easy getting people into meetings right now in the strange times that we're in. So I really appreciate all your work, and great to hear each of these areas, particularly about the community committee that you mentioned. Also the idea of taking a look as a group at Zcash and other organizations so that we can have an idea of what we want to include here as a community, include in the going forward, and something that the working group and things that the working group can work on. So is there any questions, any discussion about the things that Brittany's raised today?
It's a lot of work. So it's not only technology that we are developing, but also the governance and how to deal with all the interaction in the community is a very complex solution. It's not just a wonderful way to have your data in a private way, and secure way, but it's more than that. So it's congratulations for all the work that has been done.
Thanks. Well, I mean, I appreciate you guys all being here and contributing, and and having patience too around some of these things where it's we start trying to solve a problem, and then we realize that there's 10 other problems we have to figure out first before we can solve the original one we set out to do. So yeah, it's been a great learning process, and appreciate you guys contributing and helping and giving feedback all along the way. And I hope through this process I've realized, like, the faster we can share with this community, the more value that we can all have together, because it's like a lot of brains thinking about these things at once actually speeds it up. So thank you guys for being there.
Thank you as well, Brittany. I was just curious to ask, there's so much wonderful information in these notes you shared. Like, I'm curious if you still have big outstanding questions that are unanswered at this stage, or do you feel that like you've got most of the information you need to be able to move forward kind of confidently and like make make the right decision about things like jurisdiction and original structure of the entity, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, I think the most immediate question is around jurisdiction, because it the formation requires different setup pieces that would need to be done in short order. So having a call this afternoon with our CFO and Deloitte, because there is a tie between PBC and the foundation, giving some potential money to help start the foundation. And so those things kind of impact both sides. So unfortunately, it's not just a foundation call. Otherwise, I would invite a researcher to be on there, but there is some financial data that will need to be discussed. That's PBC specific. But with that, I think, like I said, in the next day, just talking to our legal counsel and the tax counsel around the different entities and the impact on those, and how we can truly deliver on what we want to accomplish is the number one key. So with that, I don't have an absolute answer yet if it'll be Singapore or the US, but it sounds like those two are the most likely. The other pieces of that too is just around, okay, once we stand up this foundation, once it's set up, how to best engage with the community and also represent the foundation publicly. So those are some side considerations that have kind of been put on hold, but like, do we have a website? Are we running this channel as a community? Is there another place that people congregate? We're using GitHub already, but how do we continue to have the channels of communication so that it's very clear, it's very regular updates? Because I think we've been doing a good job here. And if this is working, then let's keep it up. But if there's better ways to keep that information loop clear, that's, I think, what would be, it's still like a question mark in my mind, and I would love some input on. And then all the other pieces that you've laid out in your proposal, I think those are very clearly like, they feel very solid, and I think that there'll be a little bit of feedback as we go along, but I feel like those are all moving in the right direction. So I'm less worried about that, and I'm more just thinking about the immediate term. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, that's great. That makes total sense. Thanks, Brittany.
Thanks, Brittany. I think that some of the things you raised, particularly the thought about communications and where the best place would locate, whether it's where we are right now is fine, and also I know one thing that's been on my mind is we have a great group here, but I would like to hear some additional voices that we haven't heard from. So bringing some more voices in, and if there's a way that we can do that as we go forward. But these are all things that we can continue to keep working on week over week. I'm really excited to hear about the steps that you've taken, and as far as the jurisdiction issues, and that you're now considering also US versus Singapore to see where that's going to land. Looking forward to hear more about that. Are there any more questions, any more discussion, questions for Brittany on the Stacks Foundation? All right, so that's basically the end of the agenda that I put forward. I know there's some time if Harold, if you wanted to talk about some of the work that you've been doing and how that dovetails in what we're working on in the organization. We've got some time now before about 10 minutes before the hour. Would you like to give us a summary of what you've been working on, Harold?
Yes, thank you kindly. Yeah, I'll try to do my best with time here. Yeah, so I guess the way that it dovetails is mainly through the work of Primavera De Filippi, as she's kind of put forward a lot of important research in this blockchain space. And one of the things that I've heard Primavera say that kind of gave me the initial confidence to even work with Blockstack is this concept of a social layer that she talks about, which is this idea that blockchain technology is, you know, the infrastructure in and of itself requires an additional social layer so that that infrastructure's purpose isn't defeated, which is decentralization, right? And so what she says is that there's actually an important responsibility we have here in this space because, you know, in the future, there's this Bayesian of attraction with any technology towards concentration of wealth and power. And what blockchain technology really represents is a unique opportunity to either usher in a new social economic you know, order and structure that we haven't seen yet, because of the beautiful things that this technology is capable of. But also what is down the road is something that we haven't seen yet in terms of how vicious concentration of wealth and power can be when the visibility of who has such wealth and power becomes a little bit more opaque. Because we can see how bad you know, wealth disparity and power disparities can get when the hierarchies are actually visible. And so what blockchain technology can also give us is this new form of concentration of wealth that we haven't really seen yet. And so we have a responsibility with being able to establish an adequate social layer that can do for, you know, what the distributed the infrastructure tries to do with control or and things like this with power. So to have distributed power along with this distributed infrastructure that blockchain offers. And one of the things that I've seen come up recently in some of her work is this concept of what are viable approaches that are outside of a conventional context, because we see that there's kind of these this Bayesian of attraction in conventional governance structures that we see. I think I saw a few of the things touched on in Lane's proposal there. And so, like I've said before, I think in one of the previous meetings here, I've actually been working with an Indigenous council over the last year. And this is one of the things Primavera has actually mentioned in her work, is that some of these Indigenous approaches to social organization may be some of the only genuine and authentic alternatives to structures that we can look to in the blockchain space for you know, viable approaches to achieve authentically new social economic structures. And with Blockstack, I think this is a very unique community and technology that's being built out because of its implications for world trade. I mean, being exposed to Vinay Gupta at Blockstack London, I believe, a couple of years ago is a pretty special thing, as he talks about, you know, people working in different spaces and all in their own way in regards to the next iteration of world trade and what this can do in terms of a bump in global GDP. It is also a unique space in the context of Blockstack because of what the internet means for the future of industry, as you know, machine learning and IoTs and things like this become important for the next iterations of production, manufacturing, and distribution. And so this is a very unique opportunity for myself, and I'm sure others feel the same. With Blockstack as being one of the blockchain projects that has some of the best integrity that we've seen in a lot of different aspects, to leverage this this unique opportunity, along with dialogue with indigenous councils that I've actually had the privilege of making contact with in the last year, like I said. And I think there's also some jurisprudence things that maybe have some implications that I'd like to get some opinions on and some insight from anybody here. In that the particular council that I've made contact with has a unique jurisprudence in terms of indigenous nations, in that they actually have a flag flying on a vessel. Five Nations flag was given to, you guys might be familiar with Captain Paul Watson of the Sea Shepherd organization. They had some problems with the Japanese government and then with the Canadian government stripping their vessel of a flag that had flown on international waters, which has some quite different laws, right, in terms of what can be done to you if you don't have a recognized flag by a nation. And this particular indigenous council, has held on to nation status in a very unique way, in a very unique type of nation status that goes back to the early 1600s and has been presented to every European settler that has touched down, starting with the Dutch, English, French, even American settlers. Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin actually sat on this council's Grand Council during the founding. And also the most recent signatory is actually Quebec in the 90s of this Tuo Wampum peace treaty, which, like I said, it may offer some unique opportunities for structural innovation, but also jurisprudence in general in terms of the type of access you have to nation approval of certain things, maybe like even blockchains. This is some of the things that I've been thinking about that may even, to the point of Brittany, in terms of important people that can sit on boards or can, have the capacity to direct the future of governance in Blockstack. I think it may be a unique opportunity to track folks like Primavera de Filippi in the context of this Tuo Wampum peace treaty, the legal implications that it may have, but also the guidance for governance, or better termed in the indigenous context, management, in a consensus decision-making form. Some guidance in terms of legitimate, viable alternatives to the conventional or Western ideas of governance. But yes, we've been coordinating some meetings now with to try to get our first connection to Primavera. I've had some correspondence with Tomas Diaz of the Fab Academy, which is an interesting context because they're interested in establishing a Fab chain, which they're interested in Blockstack in this regard because of of what they can do with in the digital fabrication context, moving around, inventory for the machines and things like this that are important for fabrication, but also they're doing a lot of inroads in material development. A lot of what's important to the material development is also the revitalization of indigenous modes of production, because what they're finding out is as they start to do preliminary or the first research into material development of sustainable modes of material development of the future, so we don't get things like plastics that take a while to develop but do a lot of harm. They've said that a lot of sustainable modes have just been forgotten. And so a lot of the mentors in this digital fabrication network, which come from prestigious backgrounds, but have kind of have these a real passion and real conviction for what this digital fabrication network offers in terms of sustainability in different industries. So you can have women that come from, for example, in their textile academy, they come from prestigious architecture backgrounds or prestigious fashion and textile backgrounds, but they've kind of dedicated all of their resources and time to helping contributing to this digital fabrication network, which is very Ivy League intensive training network, which comes out of MIT, where it allows for distributed training in digital fabrication. And so Tomas Diaz is a contact that we've made that also is close to Primavera de Filippi, in that she's the things that I told you before about what she says about the future of blockchain technology. I actually heard her say that on a Fab City stage. And so it's through Tomas that we may be able to make a connection with Primavera. So I wanted to share a link here with anybody who is interested. One second.
And while you're putting that link up, Harold, I just want to note that we're at 8:03 now, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know we started at 5 minutes after the hour, but one should be respectful, and if people need to leave to go to other meetings, that's completely understood. And we can continue on with some discussion here to the extent that Harold wants to give us some more information about the work that he's been doing. Is that in agreement with everyone?
Yeah, definitely for me. Excuse me. I'm definitely excited to learn more about this. I've been reading through a little bit of what you had on the GitHub there, Harold, and I threw that link in there as well. And I think this is a really fun concept to kind of explore in general. So if we're all happy to hear a little more, I'd love for you to share.
Yeah, thank you, Connie. And of course, yes, I'd like to be respectful of time as well.
I know that there's one thing that I'm interested in, which is the, that's not the only thing, but we had some discussion about the meeting with, setting up a meeting with Tomas, and then potentially with Primavera. And I'm interested in where we can go with that, and how the working group can help with any coordination, or anyone on the call that's interested in participating can help you, Harold.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Connie. Yes, that's the link that I shared. So that anybody is interested in exactly what we're trying to coordinate there can get involved as well. I'm excited for as many contributions as possible. The thing that also gave me the confidence to finally introduce this was Friedger's mention of 100% consensus and environmental protections going into the future, which something that he, when a forum post was first made about this foundation, that he brought up, which it immediately sparked in my mind a lot of the protections that are in indigenous approaches to governance and management that try to track the morphology of these things like, expressive rights and ecological rights, labor rights, things like this over the course of, long-term dynamics, which is, I think, something that's important to the work that Primavera is trying to do. And I've, like I said before, I've been exposed to through this generative justice research group out of RPI. And so they've done a lot of important work on Bayesians of attraction, chaos theory, in terms of coordination as opposed to competition, and things like this. And a big part of their thesis is actually the very indigenous group that we made contact with about a year ago now. And it's also interesting that, like I said, it's this 201 peace treaty, the protocols that they are, that were prepared for really the entire hemisphere, as this indigenous group got word from the south of the European settlers, and some of the destruction had already happened there. But the unique part about these protocols is, well, one, they're extrapolations from indigenous cosmologies, which I'd fail if I tried to explain here. But it's the other thing that's important about it is that it's a unique type of autonomy in diplomatic relationships, which allows for that flag to fly on international waters. And so in the context of an independent entity, it may make for unique type of independence that can't necessarily be afforded through any other means, and even in other indigenous nation means, because a lot of indigenous nations have lost their nationhood status. This particular council has went through, frankly, a lot of hell to maintain this nationhood status, and that it's something that is usually taken away through treaties that came after that aren't necessarily legal. But I think there are some, like I said, legal advantages that the Blockstack community may be afforded from a dialogue with this particular indigenous council, in that for one thing, there's a whole lot less bureaucracy that will be involved if you wanted to talk to the indigenous council that has this nationhood status and can do nation things, and so, yeah, any thoughts on those particular legal, obviously there's still tremendous amount of need for all the work that Brittany has been doing in the a nonprofit context for the entity that falls within the legal jurisdictions of conventional nations and things like this, but a transnational approach to the entity that also offers different structures for the community to organize within, like I said, the important guidance that might be there for the Blockstack community and folks like Primavera who are interested in different approaches. It's also a beautiful opportunity, and it's the indigenous context is also kind of a huge step forward in the right direction in terms of the responsibilities of the blockchain space and what the implications are in world trade, in production, manufacturing, and distribution. And it's it's an interesting step in the right direction in the same way that when you look at what the historical fires that hit Australia and the indigenous groups that claim to have been there for 60,000 years, to think that for their voices not to be able to be heard in terms of it's an important part of their cosmology to protect the environment of that particular land. And it's hard to actually forge the type of relationships that's necessary and truly responsible relationship to any given geography. And this may pose a unique opportunity in that context. For the things that I mentioned, Frieger brought up in the forum post, and this foundation was first brought up. The 100% consensus and environmental protections and conventional structures may be hard, even with some of the beautiful ideas that Brittany has brought forward with the advisory board and what that can mean for community voices. It sounds good, but it's also interesting to see what the indigenous protocols that come from these indigenous cosmologies that are very much entrenched in protections of all of these things. It'll be interesting to see the structural advantages and the legal advantages that may be afforded with this proper relationship. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Harold. I really appreciate that. I got to hear a little more from you about this, and I know there's a lot more to be said, and that maybe we can have a call that goes deeply into this, in addition to aspects of public participation and bringing the community together, and how the community can participate and how that looks like from different aspects. I will mention a plug for a very old article that I wrote, which is called, you can tell from the title it is old, A Separate Jurisdiction for Cyberspace. And that does go into jurisdictional issues, as well as it goes into the law of the sea, which are some of the things that you referred to as far as a different type of a legal system, and the things that the indigenous nation is participating in, or has participated in, with the flag that's being flown on the Sea Shepherd. So I really appreciate you giving us the time and opportunity to hear this, and thank you for stepping up to bring this to our attention. Is there any questions for Harold before we end our call for the day?
Yeah, actually, I just have one real quick one for you, Harold. I mean, looking over all this, it's definitely, it's crazy to think outside of the box, right? So we're trying to go to this new concept that doesn't necessarily fit molds or anything else. So when I'm looking at this at a very macro picture of everything we're talking about, would it be your suggestion, or do you think in the context of what we're talking about here, this would be applied like to the overall entity outside of it being located in US and Singapore? Or are you thinking more of taking a lot of what we're learning here and applying that after that initial foundation is created? Just curious about the placement there, timing wise.
Yeah, I think there's obviously there's a lot of necessity in the work that Brittany's been doing. Just money wise and things like this. I don't know that those same things are possible if there's like this wraparound thing with the jurisprudence of the indigenous nation. But a second or an additional entity where the community has the option to learn these things. Maybe there's to have this dialogue and to learn, to have also another avenue for 100% consensus decision making, which is, something that Frieger mentioned, which excited me, because I know that's something that is true for the indigenous forms of consensus decision making. Also protections for gender protections. It's a matrilineal council. It's matrilineal council protocols, which you're not going to find in a lot of indigenous cases, because they've lost ceremonies, traditions. This particular traditional council also has a 2,000+ year constitution intact, oral constitution. which I'm sure someone like Primavera would be excited about, but also anyone who's interested in legitimate alternatives. And so this type of dialogue will be important and can inform, some things like the advisory board. That sounds like a brilliant idea in terms of including people's voices in a genuine way. And so it seems like there can be a, the 2.0 wampum is a reference to, two autonomous entities being able to speak peacefully. It was actually used to confederate indigenous nations before the coming of European settlers. It was actually a diplomatic tool in this way, like I said, which is an extrapolation from their cosmologies. So it's a very potent tool for diplomacy. And so I kind of see the relationship with any entity that we're able to establish in this light.
Thank you, and bear with me because I'm typing like a madman over here, but that was excellent, and that definitely just helped give me kind of a bigger picture view of where this would fit and how we could work with it. But in short, I'm just very excited about it. I think it's a really neat way to think about things, and when we talk about a 2,000 plus year oral constitution, I mean, the fact it could make it that far and some of what's been done, I'm just excited to see more of what comes out of this as we work with it together. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, Harold, the stuff is so interesting that I had this idea a little while ago to do less technical AMAs in the AMA channel and with community members as well. I wonder if you would be interested in doing that at some point. It puts a lot of pressure on you to answer questions correctly, but maybe it could be like more open dialogue style. I know that I would be interested. I have taken I'm like getting flashbacks to some seminars I took when I took philosophy in college, and definitely have like deeper questions that I would love to ask and have like a broader discussion. So maybe that's something that we can talk about offline if you'd want to have just like a larger dialogue with the broader community. I think that would be cool.
Yeah, that sounds like a beautiful idea. Thank you kindly for asking. Like you said, it would be quite a bit of pressure to answer questions correctly, but maybe I do have a relationship with this council for over the last year. Maybe they'd be interested as well.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Harold.
All right. Thank you so much, Harold. I'm really glad we got to hear that. And Jenny, I appreciate the ideas that you brought forward as far as the AMA. I think that's super exciting for all of us here and for the community, to hear this work that the Indigenous nation has been doing for 2,000 years and what Harold is working on. And also thank you, Jason, for your questions to really bring forward some of the concepts that Harold's been talking about. So I thank you all. I thank everybody on the call today. I appreciate your participation. And I thank Brittany and Lane for all their hard work. And so I think this ends our call for today, unless there's anything else anyone wants to bring up at this point. So I think
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. All right, everyone. That's the end of our call. Thank you and goodbye. Have a wonderful day and keep safe out there.
All right. Thank you so much.
Everybody.